In 1968, after Martin Luther King was assassinated.
How many more black brothers must die?
And in 2020, after George Floyd was murdered.
Please stop killing us.
Let's take a look at what's been accomplished and what's left to be done. Now, of course, the virus doesn't take holidays or long weekends. Fortunately, neither do we, as we continue to answer your very long list of vaccine questions. Oh, and you might have... Sorry. What I was trying to say was that you... Wow, that's annoying. Let's just start the show. Here's the... Oh, come on! All right. Hey. Hi, guys. Dan Haggerty here. Welcome to The Story. Reach out, ask us your questions, leave us your comments. You can email us at thestory@kgw.com. Find me on Facebook as well, or Instagram, or use Twitter and that hashtag #HeyDan. Or you can find a really creative way to get our attention, like the giant bulk carrier on the Willamette last night that laid on the foghorn for about 30 minutes, waking up half the city. Twitter user Tammy posted this video just before 1 a.m. Just like a lullaby. This is apparently the talk of the town, all right? At least in parts of downtown. People are demanding answers, like Carly, who tweeted at me and said, "Hey, Dan, I want to see a really dramatic explanation tonight about this foghorn that won't shut up to justify my being awake at 12:30 a.m. Like, I don't know, the ship better be sinking or under attack by ghost pirates." Well, I can't tell you, it wasn't ghost pirates this time. Apparently, we have fog to blame. And this vessel, the Sunleaf Grace, it was docking late last night to load up a bunch of wheat to be shipped to South Korea. Now, I talked to the Columbia River Steamship Operators Association, who told me this. In fog, like last night, a vessel underway is required to give one prolonged blast every 2 minutes until it is at dock or conditions improve. Because the Willamette River is generally more narrow than the vessel is long, it's considered a tight course. So the vessel would have to slow down for safety, which would have made the transit to the dock take longer than usual. They also shared this picture to give you an idea of what it looks like when you're on board one of these things, and it's super duper foggy. I imagine it's even worse at night. And they reminded me that these things are huge, gigantic. If you stood this Sunleaf Grace up, let's say, on Portland's skyline, it would be almost twice as tall as our tallest building. I also don't think they have those little sensors like on your bumper of your car when you're trying to parallel park on Hawthorne. Regardless, I'm not buying any of it, okay? You see, we analyzed the pattern of honks and applied Morse code, and it appears the ship's captain was sending this message, okay? So, who really knows what to believe? I also spent the day decoding some of your messages, but you were much more direct. See, you want to know more about vaccines. So why don't we do that and answer some of your questions? Leah asks, does the January vaccine for educators and staff include our kids' college educators? Unfortunately, no, it does not. Not here in Oregon, at least. Starting next week, child care providers, early learning, and K-12 educators and staff can get the vaccine. But the state hasn't released anything about college professors or staff yet. We'll stay on it. But on that same note, Matt asked, are school bus drivers allowed to get vaccinated with teachers? In this case, yes, they are. See, they're considered school staff along with janitors, so they can get vaccinated starting January 25th. Brianna asked, I want to know more about why doctors and dentists and others in Phase 1A who don't work for big hospitals aren't able to get any vaccines. So this was a big problem for healthcare workers up until about 2 weeks ago. That's when hospitals, they were really busy making sure that their own staff was getting vaccinated, but now they are expanding to independent medical workers. 3 clinics in Portland actually held vaccination events over the past 2 weekends specifically for this group. So those people are getting their shots at this point. Kurt wrote in and said, love your show, but would love to hear about vaccine status in Southwest Washington. Thanks for the compliment, and Kurt, you're in luck tonight because we have some big vaccine news for everyone in Washington. See, Governor Jay Inslee announced today that people age 65 and older can get their vaccine now. So can people who are 50 and older who live in multi-generational homes. Now, if you're not in either one of those groups and you're wondering when you can get a vaccine and you're in Washington, well, they just updated their online eligibility tool. This is a thing called Phase Finder. We have a link for it at kgw.com if you want to go on there and check it out. You just put in some of your info, like, you know, where you live, your age, any medical conditions, some of your contact info, and then the health department will notify you when it's your turn to get a shot. Now, before you ask, no, Oregon does not have a tool like this, which is why it is understandable that so many Oregonians are confused about when they get the vaccine. But lots of people are getting the vaccine here in Oregon, okay? We're improving on that front. At this point, nearly 217,000 people have gotten inoculated. This includes both first and second doses. Now, we're going to keep checking on this number every single day. We want to hold the state accountable as we had since the beginning, but it looks like good news right now. Also, it seems that Oregon is hitting its vaccination goal of 12,000 people a day. That was the goal set for this week, and we're still waiting on numbers to come in from the weekend, but updated numbers from last week show that we have passed 12,000 doses each day. Now, let's talk big story. It is, of course, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and I'm sure you've seen the tributes to him everywhere, praising the incredible work he did for the civil rights movement and American culture in general, really. But I want to share a message that I read today from his daughter that kind of made me sit up in my chair and say, that's a good point. Bernice King wrote on Twitter this morning, "Please don't act like everyone loved my father. He was assassinated. A 1967 poll reflected that he was one of the most hated men in America. Most hated. Many who quote him now and invoke him to deter justice today would likely hate and may already hate the authentic King." That really kind of sank in after I read it. Maybe it did when you heard it just now. Now, I was born after his death, like a lot of you, or perhaps you were really young when he was killed. Our generation, my generation, and younger, we hear stories of hope and kindness from our teachers or maybe from a news show, but I don't really remember hearing much about the people in the country at that time who hated Dr. King when he was alive. Now, of course, we know his life ended in an assassination that was born from that hate, but that's usually where the story leaves it. But his daughter reminded us that her father was hated for fighting for justice and equal rights. And it really isn't that hard to imagine, considering what this city has been through. Last summer, we saw people across the country, and especially here in Portland, pour into the streets. They were calling for racial justice, protesting police brutality. The Black Lives Matter movement gained a lot of steam and a lot of support, but also a lot of hate for wanting to change the same things Dr. King wanted. So if you think MLK was a hero, and today is the day that we really should all be reflecting on the things that he did for this country. But if you think he's a hero and you don't support Black Lives Matter, that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Now, when I say support Black Lives Matter, I'm not talking about supporting the rioting or smashing windows or trying to burn buildings down or attacking police or all the violence that we saw this summer. That's not what I'm getting at, okay? What I mean is that the movement is fighting for the same principles that MLK and other civil rights leaders were fighting for in the 60s. And now here we are, 50 years later, making history of our own. So down the line, in another 50 years, when someone describes this moment that we're living now, how will they be describing you? That's just something I think about. Now, Brenda Braxton spoke with the director of the Coalition of Communities of Color about this summer's protests and Dr. King's legacy. I want you to listen to a part of their conversation.
Marcus, when you think about the racial justice protests that we saw this spring and summer, what kind of similarities do you see between that and what happened back in the 60s during the civil rights movement?
I see identical, direct relationship. Everything that they were fighting for in the 60s, better housing, not to be killed by the police, better opportunities, better education, even though those marches in the spring were predicated on another killing of a Black man, they wound up being about all of those things as well. So I see direct comparison between the two.
Would you say that what happened this summer was successful?
Yes. I would say it was successful in that it brought attention and a national awareness to the same old problem, but in a different way, in a way that people couldn't look away from, people couldn't ignore. And so while not everything that we hoped for was achieved, there was a lot of progress made as far as bringing attention to an issue that won't go away.
What do you think Dr. King would have thought about the way things went down this summer?
He would have loved that it was led by young people, because his movement was led by young people. He was a young man, actually, at the very beginning of that movement. So he would have loved that the movement was determined, decided, designed, developed by young people. And he would have loved the fact that they were relentless. They kept going. When people said, haven't you protested enough? Isn't that enough already? He liked their indefatigability and their persistence. Yeah, let me switch to persistence. But he would have liked that they just kept going and kept their eyes on the prize.
So how are organizations like yours all across Oregon helping to further some of the ideals of Dr. King's?
We are trying to take this moment to further those ideals by going back to first principles, very simple things. What makes someone a whole citizen? What makes them a whole person? A home, food, education, opportunity. And so you'll see the organizations that work with us and that we partner with, we try to focus on the first principles, the very simple things that make life worth living and make citizens want to be good civically engaged citizens.
I can't let you go.
You can watch the rest of their interview on the KGWU's YouTube channel right now if you want to take some time. Now, in the meantime, as we're having this discussion, as we kind of look at the current climate, we take a look back in time, I think that we look back in the past, Portland's black community obviously publicly mourned Dr. King when he was assassinated in 1968. They had church services, there were speeches from community leaders. We went back into the KGW vault to see what we could find. Take a look.
Today, tomorrow, and in the future, we must have a full-fledged effort of all black brothers and sisters throughout the United States, and especially here in Portland, to never again look back, never stop, and never worry, but to stand up for and gain the freedom, the rights, and the justice Brother Martin Luther King died for. How many more blacks, brothers, must die before we will stand up and move forward to obtain the rights to live as decent human beings and not as sophisticated slaves? We must now, regardless of our individual differences in outlook and approach, we must unite ourselves around the points where we come together. We must create for ourselves not only awareness of existing factors which determine the courses of our lives, but we must further examine the causes and thereby work towards a solution to our problem by any means necessary. We must be willing, as Brother Martin Luther King was, to advance our cause through any means necessary if our cause is justified. If pressure is used as a controlling force, we must be ready to employ pressure to bring about change, for there will be no tomorrow without a today.
I was stunned, as most good Americans were, all through the country, and I'm sure that he will be missed and that we will never recuperate from the death of one of the greatest men who proposed nonviolence in our time. This seems like a wonderful opportunity to memorialize Dr. King, the leaders of our country, by putting forth nonviolence and working to change the inequities that have been done some of the black Americans. We know that what Dr. King stood for. We know that he changed the whole setup of the South and their thinking, and that people have viewed black people of this country with dignity since Dr. King's movement. We're hoping that this summer, instead of putting a lot of effort in trying to squash the riots after they get started, that leaders of our community will go to the heart of the causes and the trouble that starts riots and try to bring them to an end.
What an amazing interview there, right? Now, MLK actually visited Portland in 1961. The Oregonian published a write-up on it today that we think is worth your time. He spoke to a crowd at the Keller Auditorium, then known as the Civic Auditorium, in downtown Portland. And as the headline says, he challenged Oregonians to find a way to live together or perish as fools. I think that's a relevant message considering everything we've seen in the country today. We've taken you inside Woodlawn for more than a year, inviting our viewers into the halls of this Northeast Portland elementary school. Well, I hope they have room, because the rest of the country is coming to visit.
I don't think you'll find 2 black teachers in 1st grade in the state of Oregon.
When the story continues. Welcome back. I was just checking some messages during the commercial break. A lot of vaccine questions coming in. Keep those coming. We're going to keep trying to get them answered for you. Just use that hashtag #HeyDan. Now, if you've watched this show at all, you probably know a lot about Inside Woodlawn. If you're new, and we do still get a ton of new viewers each night, let me explain. And it's something that's pretty rare for local TV stations, really around the country. So for more than a year now, we've been bringing you stories from inside Woodlawn Elementary School in Northeast Portland. Kristen Severance and our photojournalists, Gene Cotton and Kurt Austin, have been telling these stories of how this community has struggled with things I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, like distance learning, or about race, equity, about gentrification in that community. And now KGW's commitment to these stories and to that project, plus the extraordinary work being done by that Woodlawn community and that school, has caught the attention of the Today Show. The folks at NBC saw our stories and wanted to highlight the Woodlawn educators. Here's their story that ran this morning.
Welcome back. In honor of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, schools across the country are closed. And this morning, we are recognizing his legacy with a story of progress being made inside the classroom.
Yeah, Dr. King once said, intelligence plus character, that is the true goal of education. We found 2 teachers in Portland, Oregon, who really seem to be the embodiment of that message. They teach 1st grade at a school that our NBC affiliate KGW has been profiling since before the pandemic began, actually. The station shared their video with us so we could share the story of these inspirational educators. Woodlawn Elementary in Portland, Oregon may look like any other school. Brick building flanked by playgrounds and ball fields. But inside, something different has been happening.
You guys refer to yourselves as unicorns. Why is that?
I came up with that name for us because I don't think you'll find 2 black teachers in 1st grade in the state of Oregon.
Lionel Clegg and Anthony Lowry know they are a rare breed across America. Just 2% of public school teachers are black men, but at Woodlawn, it's 18%.
Why do you both think it's important to have black men in the classroom?
Firmly believe that, again, sometimes just that connection of having someone that looks like you gives these kids the trust to be able to come to me and speak to me about things that maybe they're having problems with.
For a white kid, I think it's also important because when a white kid sees a black kid as their teacher, we can let them know we're more than just actors and entertainers. We are, people of substance.
Woodlawn, a traditionally black neighborhood, has been gentrified in recent years, altering the racial makeup at homeroom.
Word! Tree! Word! Small! Word! Bird!
But it's no coincidence that 40% of the teachers here are people of color. Many are graduates of the Portland Teachers Program, which offered full tuition waivers and training to minority education students in an effort to put diversity at the head of the class.
Lionel, I understand that you were actually Anthony's mentor.
Yes.
And now you work together, both teaching 1st grade.
I'm honored to have him as my colleague.
He was a role model to me, even though I'm 5 years older than him. He's still a role model to me because he gave me the courage to do the things I do.
Our existence is our own!
In recent months, Portland has seen widespread protests following the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others.
Both of you spent some time earlier this year teaching your students about what was happening in our country with regards to the protests. Why?
It's what's going on. It's life, and I'm not wanting to sugarcoat anything. It helps our next generation learn how to encounter these situations as well. If we don't teach them the history of our country, then we're bound to repeat it.
How do you go about teaching a 1st grader about some of what we were seeing play out?
It really just starts with trying to make it relatable to them. One of our key things we typically do in the 1st grade is talk about Ruby Bridges, who was one of the first African-American little girls to go to an all-white school, and ironically, she was in the 1st grade.
The beauty about children, especially primary children, is they're not born with racist tenets and ideas.
Cameron Green may be 11 years old now and in 6th grade, but she still remembers the advice she got from Mr. Clegg.
He always used to say, like, don't think about the negative stuff. If you're in a negative situation, always think about the positive things, which is something that I always just kept with me. I was like, yeah, let's do that.
He was preparing you for life.
Yes.
For Clegg and Lowry, that validates their calling.
Greatness is the impact of the service that you leave. I'm not in this for, people saying Mr. Clegg is the best teacher. I want to see my children grow up and be successful. I want them to want it for themselves and to understand why that's important and understand why education is going to be the key to their success in the future.
Okay, Kristen Severn's joining us now. I want a little behind-the-scenes information here. How did this make its way to the Today Show?
So we had been sending our stories to our contacts at NBC. Those stories made their way to a Today Show producer who does a lot of stories with Craig Melvin, and that's really the Cliff Notes version of really how this story made it to today.
Well, I hope a lot of people saw it this morning and recognized them right away and said, those are our local people. What's going on with the program, though, at the center of this piece that ran on the Today Show?
So it really depends on who you ask, and I'm working on a story about that right now. Portland State University is adamant that the PTP, that the program will continue, but they have said there will be changes to the program. Now, the PTP alumni say, look, if you make those changes, then that's not the program that we went through. And it's much more complicated than that. And again, I am working on a deeper story, kind of explaining what happens next.
Okay, we'll look for that. Kristen, thank you.
You bet.
Now tonight, the second episode of a new sponsored series called Expressions in Black airs here on KGW. It features stories centered on local people of color told documentary style. This week focuses on the Equitable Giving Circle, improving the lives of Black and Indigenous people of color here in Portland.
I've always wanted to do this kind of work directly for my community and be able to live off of it. And so during a pandemic, I accidentally created that job. When I think about community, I think of a circle. We're raising money for equity. We're actively giving. And the word circle is encompassing all of the things that we are doing. We have a food program where we are buying produce from Black and brown farmers and giving that produce weekly to Black and brown families across the metro area. We've started some other little projects, including the plant jam. And it's just an ask for white folks to give plants to BIPOC folks, Black, Indigenous people of color.
We are providing reparations to the community through plants. Amazing. So we have them all right here. Also like hanging, look at all the different nooks and crannies and corners, there's something everywhere.
It's just a really beautiful way to create community care. And it's also a way to teach and practice reparations. We're practicing sharing things that we have with other people, no strings attached. You did it with a plant. Now you could do it with some money.
Yeah.
The full episode airs tonight immediately after a special Martin Luther King Day edition of KGW News at 7 o'clock. All right, keep sending those comments. You can use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, foghorn, whatever you want. We're going to read some at the end of the story, and we'll finish up next. All right, getting some great comments about the coverage at Woodlawn. Keep those coming. Let Kristen hear them as well. So reach out to her while you're using the hashtag Hey Dan. We got Pam messaged me on Instagram tonight and said, can you please explain how without a reserve, yet proceeding forward with vaccinating new groups of Oregonians in the weeks to come, where is the second dose coming from? Is it already set aside? So a couple of things to unpack here. For one, yes, every time you get a first shot in Oregon, it's part of their plan. They take your second shot and they put it to the side. So you're not going to get, as we stand right now, you're not going to get a first shot unless you have shot number 2 waiting on you so that you can be properly vaccinated as the schedule calls for. Secondly, while we made a big deal about the Federal Reserve, right, that we were promised last week and then that was kind of taken away, and we're still waiting for a lot of information about that non-existent reserve, we are still getting shipments of vaccines. So we aren't just sitting there kind of dipping into our savings and everything's going to run out. There are still vaccine coming into this state that is then being put into the plan that the state is still working on right now. But please keep the questions coming. You're going to have them until the very end. I know it. And we're going to keep trying to answer them for you. That's it for the story here on a Monday on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Have a good one. We'll see you back here tomorrow.